The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Nora Caldwell as she stumbled across the parched landscape, her vision blurring with each desperate step. The year was 1878, and she had been walking for 3 days after fleeing a stagecoach robbery that had left the other passengers dead and her with nothing but the tattered dress on her back. Just a little further, she gasped, her throat so dry it felt like sandpaper. Ahead, she could make out what looked like a small ranch house, chimney smoke rising in a thin plume against the clear blue sky. It was her only hope in this desolate stretch of territory, but her body had other plans. The hunger, thirst, and exhaustion finally claimed their due as her knees buckled beneath her. Nora collapsed in the dust, the coarse earth pressing against her cheek as consciousness began to slip away. Her last thought before darkness took her was a prayer that whoever lived in that distant house might be kind. Flynn Harrington was leading his horse back to the stable after a long morning of mending fences when he spotted something unusual in the distance. Squinting against the sun's glare, he realized with a start that it was a person lying motionless in the dirt about 100 yards from his property. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, immediately dropping the reins and sprinting toward the fallen figure. As he drew closer, he saw it was a woman with auburn hair now coated in dust, her skin frighteningly pale beneath the layer of dirt and the beginnings of sunburn. Miss, can you hear me?" Flynn knelt beside her, gently turning her over. She was alive, but barely, her breathing shallow and her lips cracked from dehydration. He noted with concern the bruises on her arms and a small cut above her eyebrow. Without hesitation, Flynn gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. She was too light, suggesting she hadn't eaten properly in days. He carried her swiftly across his property toward the modest ranch house he'd built with his own hands 3 years earlier after settling in this remote corner of the Arizona territory. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "You're safe now." Inside, Flynn carefully laid her on his bed, the only proper one in the house. He quickly fetched a basin of cool water and a cloth, beginning the process of cleaning the dust from her face and arms. He worked with gentle efficiency, having learned some nursing skills during the war. Once he'd made her as comfortable as possible, he prepared a mixture of water and a little sugar, carefully spooning tiny amounts between her lips to begin the rehydration process without risking her choking. For hours, Flynn tended to the mysterious woman, wondering what catastrophe had brought her to the brink of death on his doorstep. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the closest town another 10 beyond that. Whatever her story, it couldn't be a pleasant one. As night fell, Flynn settled into the wooden chair beside the bed, determined to be there when she awakened. Outside, the desert winds whispered around the eaves of his solitary home, and for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. When Nora finally opened her eyes, the first light of dawn was filtering through a window she didn't recognize. Panic flared instantly as she tried to sit up, only to fall back with a groan as her head swam with dizziness. "Easy there," came a deep voice from somewhere to her right. "You're safe, but you need to rest." Nora turned her head carefully to see a man rising from a chair beside the bed. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, as if he hadn't bothered with a proper haircut in months. "Where am I?" she managed to croak, her throat still painfully dry. "My ranch, about 25 miles northeast of Copper Springs," he replied, pouring water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Name's Flynn Harrington. Found you collapsed not far from the house yesterday afternoon." He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back with one strong arm while holding the cup to her lips with the other hand. "Small sips," he instructed. "You were badly dehydrated." Nora obeyed, the cool water bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. As her faculties returned, she became acutely aware that she was in a stranger's bed, in a stranger's home, completely at his mercy. "Thank you for helping me," she said cautiously. "I'm Nora Caldwell." Pleased to meet you, Miss Caldwell, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Flynn set the cup down and stepped back, giving her space. If you don't mind my asking, what happened to bring you all the way out here alone? Nora hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Her experience over the past year had taught her to be wary of strangers, even helpful ones. The stagecoach I was traveling on was attacked 3 days ago, she finally said. Bandits, they killed everyone else. I pretended to be dead until they left, then I just started walking. Flynn's expression darkened. The Sutherland gang, they've been terrorizing this territory for months now. Sheriff can't seem to catch them. He shook his head grimly. I'm mighty sorry that happened to you, Miss Caldwell. You're welcome to rest here as long as you need to recover. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose, Nora replied automatically, though the thought of continuing her journey anytime soon made her feel ill. It's no imposition, not much company out this way, and I've got plenty of space, Flynn assured her. Now, I'll bet you're hungry. I've got some stew warming on the stove if you think you could manage a little food. As if on cue, Nora's stomach growled audibly, and a hint of color returned to her pale cheeks. I think I could try, she admitted. Flynn nodded and left the room, returning moments later with a bowl of fragrant stew. The simple act of kindness nearly brought tears to Nora's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown her genuine concern without wanting something in return. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, she said softly as he placed the tray across her lap. Flynn, please, he replied with a small smile. Mr. Harrington was my father, and he was a far more respectable man than I'll ever be. There was something in his tone, a hint of old pain, perhaps, that made Nora look at him more closely. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness to Flynn Harrington that she hadn't expected to find in a man living alone in such a remote location. Well then, Flynn, she said, returning his smile tentatively, I'm grateful for your hospitality. Over the next several days, Nora gradually regained her strength. Flynn proved to be a considerate host, giving her privacy while ensuring she had everything she needed. He insisted she continue using his bed while he slept on a pallet in the main room of the small ranch house. By her 4th day at the ranch, Nora felt well enough to move around. She discovered that Flynn's home, though modest, was meticulously maintained. There were small touches that spoke of refinement, not often found in bachelor quarters in the territory's shelves, lined with well-worn books. A small collection of botanical sketches framed on one wall. A chess set carved from dark and light wood positioned near the stone fireplace. Flynn returned from his morning chores to find Nora examining the chess pieces with careful fingers. Do you play? He asked, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. My father taught me, she replied, replacing the knight she'd been admiring, though it's been years. Perhaps we could have a game later, Flynn suggested, if you're feeling up to it. I'd like that, Nora said, surprised to realize she genuinely meant it. There was something comforting about the normalcy of the suggestion after the trauma she'd endured. That evening, they sat across the chessboard from each other, the crackling fire providing both warmth and light as the desert temperature dropped with the setting sun. Flynn proved to be a thoughtful player, considering each move carefully. Where did you learn? Nora asked after capturing one of his pawns. During the war, Flynn replied, his eyes remaining on the board. There wasn't much to do between battles except worry, so chess helped pass the time and keep the mind occupied. You fought for the Union. Nora ventured, noting the hint of a northern accent that occasionally colored his speech. Flynn nodded. Pennsylvania 83rd Infantry, enlisted when I was 18, fought until Appomattox. He moved his bishop diagonally across the board. And you? Where did you call home before finding yourself in this God-forsaken territory? Nora's fingers hovered over a pawn as memories flooded back the grand house in Boston, her father's shipping business, the life of comfort she once took for granted. Boston, originally, she said quietly. But after my parents died of influenza 5 years ago, I moved to St. Louis to live with my aunt. She passed last year, which is when I decided to accept a teaching position in Tucson. She moved her pawn forward. I was on my way there when the stagecoach was attacked. You're a teacher? Flynn asked, genuine interest in his voice. Yes, literature and mathematics primarily, though I've taught other subjects when needed. That explains the way you consider your moves, Flynn said with a small smile. Methodical, like you're solving a problem. The observation, so casually made, caught Nora by surprise. Few people had ever paid enough attention to notice such a detail about her. They played until the fire burned low, neither rushing to end the peaceful evening. When Flynn finally checkmated her king, Nora found herself disappointed not because she'd lost, but because their time together was drawing to a close. Same time tomorrow? Flynn asked as he carefully put away the chess pieces. I'd like that, Nora replied, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. As days turned into a week, Nora found herself falling into a comfortable routine at the ranch. Though still recovering, she insisted on helping with some of the lighter household tasks, unable to remain idle while Flynn worked from dawn until dusk. You don't have to do that, Flynn protested when he found her hanging freshly laundered shirts on the line behind the house. I know, Nora replied simply. I want to. It feels good to be useful again. Flynn studied her for a moment, then nodded in understanding. Well, if you're determined to work, would you mind helping me with the ledgers tonight? Numbers were never my strong suit, and I've been putting off the accounting for longer than I should. That evening, seated at the kitchen table with Flynn's account books spread before them, Nora discovered that he was being modest about his mathematical abilities. His records were meticulous, if unconventionally organized. This is impressive, she remarked, running her finger down a column of figures. Most ranchers I've known barely kept track of their expenditures at all. Flynn looked slightly embarrassed by the praise. My father insisted we all learn proper bookkeeping, said a man who can't account for his money won't have it for long. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Flynn agreed, a shadow crossing his features. Didn't approve of me heading west, though. Wanted me to take over the family hardware store in Philadelphia. We didn't part on good terms. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. Have you been in touch with him since? Flynn shook his head. He died 2 years after I left. My sister wrote to tell me, but by then it was too late. The regret in his voice was palpable, and without thinking, Nora placed her hand over his. I understand. I quarreled with my father before he fell ill. We reconciled before the end, but I still think about all the time we wasted being stubborn. Flynn looked down at her hand on his, then met her eyes. Seems we have that in common, then. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. Nora became acutely aware of the rough calluses on Flynn's palm beneath her fingers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the flecks of gold in his gray eyes reflecting the lamplight. She withdrew her hand slowly, returning her attention to the ledgers with a fluttering sensation in her stomach that she hadn't felt in years. That night, lying in Flynn's bed, Nora faced an uncomfortable truth. She was beginning to care for this solitary cowboy with his quiet strength and unexpected depths. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Her plan had always been to continue to Tucson once she recovered, to start the new life she'd been seeking. Developing feelings for Flynn Harrington had never been part of that plan. And yet, as she drifted towards sleep, it was his face she saw behind closed eyelids, the gentle crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the thoughtful furrow of his brow as he concentrated on a chess move, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wouldn't notice. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of raised voices outside. Slipping from bed, she moved to the window to see Flynn confronting 3 men on horseback. Even from a distance, she could tell by their posture that the conversation was tense. Hastily dressing, she made her way outside just as the riders were turning to leave. One of them, a man with a scar running from temple to chin, gave her an appraising look that made her skin crawl. So the rumors are true, the scarred man drawled. Harrington's got himself a woman. Miss Caldwell is a guest recovering from an ordeal, Flynn replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. And I believe our business is concluded, Sutherland. Nora froze at the name. Sutherland, the gang that had attacked her stagecoach. The leader smirked, his gaze still fixed on Nora. For now, maybe, but you might want to reconsider my offer, Harrington. Things can get mighty dangerous out here for a man alone. His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Nora, or not so alone as the case may be. With that parting threat, the three men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Flynn turned to Nora, his expression grave. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Those men. They're the ones who attacked the stagecoach, Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Flynn nodded grimly. Elias Sutherland and his brothers. They've been trying to force the smaller ranchers in the area to sell out, been getting more aggressive lately. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steering her back toward the house. Don't worry, they won't bother us again anytime soon. But Nora could hear the uncertainty beneath his reassurance. What did he mean about reconsidering his offer? Flynn hesitated before answering. They want my water rights. I've got the best spring in the county running through the northwest corner of my property. Sutherland's been trying to buy it, but I won't sell. And if you don't sell, Nora asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. So far it's just been threats and some cut fence lines, Flynn replied, his jaw tightening, but Sutherland's not known for his patience. That night, their chess game was subdued, both preoccupied with the morning's confrontation. Nora found herself watching Flynn more closely, noting the way he occasionally glanced toward the window at a distant sound, how his hand sometimes drifted to the revolver he'd begun wearing at his hip. You're worried, she observed after he'd made a careless move that cost him his queen. Flynn looked up, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've dealt with men like Sutherland before. They don't back down easily, and having seen you here, they now have something else to threaten me with. Me? Nora asked, though she'd suspected as much. You saw the way he looked at you, Flynn said, his voice hardening, and you're a witness to their crimes. 2 reasons for them to consider you a problem. Nora set down the chess piece she'd been holding, her decision suddenly clear. Then I should leave. Continue to Tucson as I planned. I won't put you in danger because of me. No, Flynn's response was immediate and firm. That's exactly what they'd expect. They'd be watching the trails. You wouldn't make it 10 miles. I can't stay here indefinitely, Nora protested, though the prospect of leaving Flynn's ranch filled her with a strange sense of loss. The teaching position will be filled if I don't arrive soon. Just give it a little more time, Flynn said, his expression softening. Sheriff Douglas comes by every few weeks. When he does, he can escort you safely to town. Nora wanted to argue further, but the genuine concern in Flynn's eyes stopped her. Very well. But I won't be the cause of trouble for you after all you've done for me. You're no trouble, Nora, Flynn said quietly, his use of her first name sending an unexpected thrill through her. Truth is, I've enjoyed having you here. It's been nice not being alone. The admission, so simply stated, touched something deep within Nora. She reached across the chessboard and took his hand in hers. I've enjoyed it too. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Nora thought Flynn might lean across the table to kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it to reset the chessboard. Another game? He asked, his voice slightly rough. Yes, Nora replied, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. Another game. The next week passed in a strange mixture of domestic tranquility and underlying tension. Flynn increased his vigilance, checking the property perimeter twice daily and keeping his rifle close at hand. Yet between these precautions, life at the ranch continued with a semblance of normalcy that began to feel dangerously comfortable to Nora. She found herself looking forward to their evenings together, the shared meals, the chess games, the conversations that often lasted until the fire burned low. Flynn proved to be well-read despite his frontier lifestyle, and they spent hours discussing everything from Dickens to Darwin. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Flynn asked the question Nora had been dreading. "What will you do in Tucson? Besides teaching, I mean." Nora considered her answer carefully. "Start fresh, I suppose. After my aunt died, there was nothing left for me in St. Louis. No family, few friends." She traced a pattern on the wooden armrest of her chair. The teaching position seemed like an opportunity to build something new. And now, Flynn's voice was careful, measured, as if he too understood they were approaching dangerous territory. "Now I'm not certain," Nora admitted. "Everything feels different after what happened with the stagecoach." After coming here, Flynn turned to look at her, the dying sunlight casting half his face in shadow. "You could stay, you know. Copper Springs needs a teacher too. The miners' children get precious little education as it is." The offer hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to voice. "Flynn," Nora began, but was interrupted by the distant sound of a gunshot, followed by the frantic bleating of sheep. Flynn was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the porch railing. "Stay inside," he ordered, his expression suddenly hard. "Lock the door behind me." "What is it?" Nora asked, rising to her feet. "Trouble," Flynn replied grimly. "Do as I say, Nora, please." Without waiting for a response, he was gone, striding purposefully toward the pasture where the sound had come from. Nora watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, making a decision that went against both Flynn's instructions and her better judgment, she hurried inside to retrieve the small revolver Flynn had shown her how to use for protection. The sun had almost completely set by the time Nora caught up with Flynn at the western edge of his property. He was kneeling beside a dead sheep, examining what was clearly a bullet wound. "I told you to stay at the house," he said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence. "You might need help," Nora replied, moving to stand beside him. "What happened?" "Sutherland's warning," Flynn said, rising to his feet and scanning the darkening landscape. "Killing livestock is usually just the beginning." A flicker of movement caught Nora's eye from the ridge above them. "Flynn," she cried, just as a rifle shot cracked through the twilight air. Flynn staggered, clutching his left arm as blood began to seep between his fingers. Nora rushed to his side, helping to steady him as more shots rang out, kicking up dust around their feet. "We need to get to cover," Flynn grunted, pulling her toward a nearby outcropping of rocks. They half ran, half stumbled to safety as bullets continued to strike the ground behind them. Once behind the rocks, Flynn leaned heavily against the stone, his face pale in the gathering darkness. "Damn it all," he muttered. "Should have known they'd be watching." Nora was already examining his arm, tearing a strip from her petticoat to create a makeshift bandage. "It's a clean wound, straight through the muscle," she assessed, working quickly to stem the bleeding. "But we need to get you back to the house." "Not until whoever's up there is gone," Flynn replied, gritting his teeth as she tightened the bandage. "Can't risk moving into the open again." "Then I'll go," Nora decided, checking the revolver she'd brought. "I can circle around through the wash and come up behind them." "Absolutely not," Flynn said, grabbing her wrist. "That's exactly what they want, to separate us." "We can't just wait here while you bleed," Nora argued, "and they have the high ground." Their whispered argument was interrupted by a voice calling from the ridge. "That was just a warning, Harrington. Next time we won't aim for your arm." There was a pause then. "All you have to do is sign over those water rights and this all goes away." Flynn exchanged a look with Nora, then called back. "Not going to happen, Sutherland. This land is mine, fair and square." "Nobody has to get hurt, Harrington," came the reply. "Well, nobody else anyhow. Think about your lady friend there. You want her getting caught in the crossfire." Nora felt a chill at the direct threat, but Flynn's expression only hardened. "If you or your men come any closer to her," he shouted, "I'll kill every last one of you." The declaration, delivered with such fierce conviction, made Nora stare at Flynn in surprise. The protective fury in his eyes was unlike anything she'd ever seen. A harsh laugh echoed from the ridge. Big words for a man bleeding behind a rock. We'll give you until morning to reconsider. After that, well, hope you've made your peace." They heard the sounds of horses moving away, but Flynn motioned for Nora to stay down. "Could be a trick," he whispered. "We'll wait a bit to make sure they're gone." As the minutes stretched on, Flynn's face grew increasingly pale, and Nora noticed with alarm that blood had soaked through her makeshift bandage. "We need to move," she insisted. "You've lost too much blood." Flynn nodded weakly. "All right, but stay low and move quickly. Head for the creek bed, it'll give us cover most of the way back." The journey to the house was agonizingly slow. Flynn stumbled several times, leaning heavily on Nora despite his attempts to remain upright on his own. By the time they reached the back door, his shirt was soaked with sweat and blood, and Nora was practically supporting his entire weight. Inside, she helped him to the bed, quickly gathering clean cloths, water, and the bottle of whiskey Flynn kept for medicinal purposes. With efficiency born of necessity, Nora cleaned and rebandaged the wound properly, using skills she'd learned helping at a soldier's hospital during the war. "You're quite good at that," Flynn observed through clenched teeth as she finished securing the bandage. "My mother insisted I learn nursing during the war," Nora explained, wiping her blood-stained hands on a cloth. "She said it was a woman's duty to help however we could." "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Nora agreed softly. "She would have liked you, I think." Flynn managed a weak smile. High praise indeed. Nora checked his forehead for fever, relieved to find his skin cool. "You should rest now. The bleeding has stopped, but you've lost a lot of blood." "Can't rest," Flynn argued, attempting to sit up. "Sutherland and his men could come back any time." "Not tonight," Nora said firmly, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "Even outlaws need sleep, and they think they have until morning. Right now, you need to recover your strength." Flynn looked as though he wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking him. "Wake me in a few hours," he murmured, his eyelids growing heavy. "We'll need to prepare." "I will," Nora promised, though she had no intention of disturbing his much-needed rest. After Flynn drifted into sleep, Nora sat beside him for a long while, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. In the quiet of the night, she could no longer deny the truth she'd been avoiding. She had fallen in love with Flynn Harrington. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a calm resolve. Whatever came with the morning light, she would face it alongside this man who had saved her life and somehow awakened her heart. Taking care not to wake Flynn, Nora began preparations for what might come. She checked and loaded Flynn's spare revolver, gathered extra ammunition, and positioned furniture to provide cover if the house came under fire. Then she settled into the chair beside the bed, prepared to keep watch through the night. Sometime past midnight, Flynn stirred, opening his eyes to find Nora still sitting vigilant beside him. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I will," she replied, though they both knew it was a half-truth at best. Flynn studied her face in the dim lamplight. "You're planning something," he observed. "I can see it in your eyes." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "I've been thinking about what Sutherland said, about me being a witness." She leaned forward, speaking earnestly. "Flynn, if I were to go to the authorities—" "No," Flynn interrupted, struggling to sit up despite the pain. "That's exactly what they're counting on. The minute you leave this property, they'll be waiting." "Then what do you suggest?" Nora asked. "We can't simply wait for them to attack." Flynn was quiet for a moment, considering. "There's a settler family about 5 miles south. The Reeves. Daniel Reeves and I have helped each other out a few times. If we could get word to him, he might be able to fetch the sheriff from Copper Springs." "How would we get a message to him without being seen?" Nora asked. "There's an old Apache trail that runs along the creek," Flynn explained. "It's hard to spot unless you know it's there." "You're in no condition to make that journey," Nora interrupted firmly. "I'll go." "Nora, no," Flynn protested. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here waiting for Sutherland to return with more men," Nora countered. "I'm not helpless, Flynn. I can follow a trail and deliver a message." They argued back and forth, neither willing to yield, until Flynn finally sighed in defeat. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said, though there was a hint of admiration in his tone. "So I've been told," Nora replied with a small smile. "Now tell me exactly how to find this trail." As the first hint of dawn brightened the eastern sky, Nora prepared to leave. Flynn had written a brief note to Daniel Reeves explaining the situation and requesting assistance. Now he watched with worried eyes as Nora tucked the folded paper into her boot. "Stay in the creek bed until you reach the large cottonwood with the split trunk," he reminded her for the third time. "Then head east until you see the 3 standing rocks. The trail runs just beyond them." "I remember," Nora assured him, checking that the revolver was secure in the pocket of the jacket Flynn had insisted she wear despite the warm morning. Flynn reached out to take her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his injury. "Be careful," he said simply, though his eyes conveyed far more than his words. Nora squeezed his hand in return. "I will, and I'll be back with help before you know it." She turned to go, but Flynn didn't release her hand. Instead, he pulled her gently back to him. "Nora," he began, then faltered, as if struggling to find the right words. "If anything were to happen to you—" "It won't," she promised, her heart racing at the emotion in his voice. Flynn searched her face for a moment longer, then, with a decisiveness that took her breath away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a brief kiss, gentle yet insistent, filled with all the things they hadn't yet found words to express. When they parted, Nora was certain her racing pulse had nothing to do with the dangerous mission ahead. "I'll come back to you," she whispered. "That's a promise." Flynn nodded, finally releasing her hand. "I'll hold you to that." Nora slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn light, keeping low as she made her way toward the creek bed. She glanced back once to see Flynn watching from the window, rifle at the ready to provide cover if needed. The journey to the Reeves homestead took longer than expected. The trail, while well hidden as Flynn had described, was also challenging to navigate, especially for someone unaccustomed to the terrain. By the time Nora spotted the smoke from a chimney rising in the distance, the sun was high overhead, and she was both exhausted and anxious about leaving Flynn alone for so long. Daniel Reeves proved to be everything Flynn had described: reliable, quick-thinking, and immediately willing to help. His wife, Martha, insisted on feeding Nora a hearty meal while Daniel saddled his horse to ride for the sheriff. "Flynn's done right by us more times than I can count," Daniel explained as he prepared to leave. "About time we returned the favor." He glanced at his teenage son, who was checking the priming on a shotgun. "James and I will head back with you. Martha can follow with the sheriff when he arrives." Relief washed over Nora. "Thank you. Flynn will be grateful for the help." "From what I hear," Martha said with a knowing smile as she packed provisions for the journey, "Flynn Harrington's found something worth fighting for beyond just his land." Nora felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but she didn't deny it. "We should hurry," she said instead. "I don't like leaving him there alone." The return journey was faster, riding double with Daniel while his son followed on a second horse. As they approached Flynn's property, Daniel signaled for them to slow, motioning toward a plume of dust rising in the distance. "Riders," he said grimly. "At least 3, maybe more." Nora's heart sank. "Sutherland, we're too late." "Not yet, we're not," Daniel replied, urging his horse to a faster pace while staying within the cover of the trees along the creek. "If we circle around, we can come up behind the house. Might just give Flynn the advantage he needs." As they drew closer, Nora could make out 4 riders approaching Flynn's ranch from the north. There was no sign of activity from the house itself, which she prayed meant Flynn had seen them coming and taken cover. Daniel led them through a stand of mesquite trees that provided concealment until they reached the back of Flynn's property. Dismounting quickly, he handed Nora a small rifle from his saddlebag. "You know how to use this?" he asked. Nora nodded, checking the weapon with steady hands. "Flynn taught me." Daniel looked impressed. "Good man. All right, James and I will circle around to the barn. You head for the house, but stay low and out of sight. Let Flynn know help is coming, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Understood. Understood, Nora confirmed, already moving toward the back door of the ranch house. She reached it without incident, slipping inside to find Flynn positioned at the front window, rifle at the ready. He whirled at the sound of her entrance, relief washing over his features when he recognized her. "Nora," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 quick strides to embrace her. "Thank God you're safe. Daniel and James Reeves are here," she informed him quickly. "They're positioning themselves by the barn. Martha's gone for the sheriff." Flynn's expression hardened as he glanced back toward the window. "Sutherland and his brothers just arrived. They've brought another man I don't recognize." Nora moved to the window, staying carefully out of sight as she peered around the edge of the curtain. Elias Sutherland and 3 other men had dismounted about 50 yards from the house and were spreading out in a semicircle. "Harrington," Sutherland called out. "Time's up. You ready to talk business, or do we need to get persuasive?" Flynn's jaw tightened. "I need to draw their attention to the front," he said quietly to Nora. "Give Daniel and James a chance to get into position." He raised his voice to call back to Sutherland. "I told you yesterday this land isn't for sale. It's not just about the land anymore," Sutherland replied. "Your woman there is a witness to our business with that stagecoach. Can't have that kind of liability walking around." Flynn's expression darkened dangerously. "You'll have to go through me to get to her," he shouted back, "and I promise you won't like the outcome." Sutherland laughed, a harsh sound that carried clearly in the still afternoon air. "Big talk from a man outnumbered 4-1. Last chance, Harrington. Sign over the water rights, hand over the woman, and maybe we let you ride out of here alive." Nora felt a chill at the casual way Sutherland discussed her fate, but Flynn's steady presence beside her kept the fear at bay. "Never going to happen, Sutherland," Flynn called back. Then, lowering his voice for only Nora to hear, he added, "I need you to move to the back window. When the shooting starts, try to get a clear shot at the man on the far left. He's the only one with a rifle that can reach the house." Nora nodded, moving carefully to take up position as directed. Through the back window, she could see Daniel and James now in place behind the barn, ready to flank Sutherland's men. Outside, Sutherland's patience had clearly run out. "Have it your way, Harrington," he called. "Boys, burn him out." One of the men pulled something from his saddlebag, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. As he prepared to light it, Flynn took careful aim and fired, shattering the bottle in the man's hand. Instantly, the air erupted with gunfire. Nora steadied her rifle against the window frame, sighting on the man Flynn had identified. She took a deep breath, then squeezed the trigger as Flynn had taught her. The man cried out, dropping his rifle as her bullet found its mark in his shoulder. From their position behind the barn, Daniel and James opened fire, catching Sutherland's men in a deadly crossfire. One of the brothers fell immediately, while another dove behind a water trough for cover. Sutherland himself seemed to realize the trap too late. As he turned to retreat toward his horse, Flynn's bullet caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling in the dust. "It's over, Sutherland," Flynn shouted. "Throw down your weapons." For a tense moment, it seemed the remaining men might continue fighting. Then, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made everyone freeze. Sheriff Douglas and 6 deputies came into view, rifles at the ready. "Everyone hold your fire," the sheriff bellowed. "This situation is now under the jurisdiction of the law." What followed was a flurry of activity as Sutherland and his remaining men were disarmed and taken into custody. Nora found herself giving a detailed statement about the stagecoach robbery, while Flynn, despite his injury, insisted on remaining by her side throughout the process. By the time the sheriff and his deputies departed with their prisoners, the sun was beginning to set. Daniel and Martha Reeves, having declined Flynn's invitation to stay for dinner, had also headed home, promising to return the next day to help with repairs to the damaged property. Finally alone, Nora and Flynn stood on the porch, watching as the last traces of daylight faded from the western sky. "You saved my life today," Flynn said quietly. "Seems to be becoming a habit for us saving each other." Nora smiled, leaning slightly against his uninjured side. "I believe that's what partners do." Flynn turned to face her, his expression serious. "Is that what we are, partners?" "I'd like us to be," Nora replied, her heart quickening at the intensity in his gaze. "If you would." "I want more than that, Nora," Flynn said, taking her hand in his. "When I saw you ride away this morning, I realized I couldn't bear the thought of you not coming back, not just because of the danger, but because the idea of this place without you in it felt empty." Nora felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I felt the same way riding back," she admitted. "All I could think about was getting back to you, not just because you needed help, but because I needed to be where you are." Flynn lifted his free hand to gently cup her cheek. "I love you, Nora Caldwell. I know it's fast and maybe it's foolish given everything that's happened, but I love you, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you so." "It's not foolish," Nora whispered, covering his hand with hers. "Not when I love you too." The kiss they shared then was different from the desperate one that morning, slower, deeper, a promise rather than a farewell. When they finally parted, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Stay," he said simply, "not just for now, but for good. Marry me, Nora. Be my partner in everything." Nora's heart soared at the words she hadn't dared hope to hear. "Yes," she answered without hesitation, "yes to all of it." 3 months later, Nora stood before a mirror in the newly expanded bedroom of Flynn's, now their ranch house, adjusting the simple white dress Martha Reeves had helped her make for the occasion. "You look beautiful," Flynn said from the doorway, his eyes reflecting the same love and wonder they had shown that day on the porch. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding," Nora teased, though she made no move to shoo him away. "I've never been one for convention," Flynn replied with a grin, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "Besides, I wanted a moment alone with you before we're surrounded by half the county." It was true that their small wedding had grown considerably as news spread. Flynn's reputation as the man who finally brought down the Sutherland gang had made him something of a local hero, and it seemed everyone wanted to celebrate the union of the brave rancher and the schoolteacher who had helped capture the notorious outlaws. "Are you nervous?" Flynn asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Not about marrying you," Nora replied honestly, "though I admit I'm a bit anxious about starting at the schoolhouse next week." Following their engagement, the town council of Copper Springs had practically begged Nora to take the position of schoolteacher, the previous one having departed for California months earlier. She had accepted with Flynn's enthusiastic support, arranging to ride into town 3 days a week while helping manage the ranch on the other days. "You'll be wonderful," Flynn assured her. "Those children don't realize how lucky they are to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Nora said, leaning up to kiss him softly. "6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything when that stagecoach was attacked. I never imagined that collapsing in the dust outside a stranger's home would lead me to everything I ever wanted." Flynn smiled, pulling her close. "I thank God every day that I looked up from mending that fence at exactly the right moment to see you." A knock at the door interrupted them, followed by Martha Reeves's voice. "The minister's here and the guests are getting restless. Are you two ready?" Flynn and Nora exchanged a look filled with love and promise. "We're ready," they answered in unison, stepping forward together into the future they would build side by side.